Amazing. So welcome everyone. My name is Manat Kaur and I'm a sophomore. And we've been running Product Pathways, which is a student organization bringing leaders in product here to Stanford to speak with Stanford students and share more about their journey for the last year now. And today I'm super excited to be here with Mr. Daniel Danker. He's the CPO at Instacart. And before that, he also spent some time at Uber and Shazam and Facebook. So thank you so much for being here today. I'd love to start by learning a little bit more about how you got interested in product and what your experience has been so far.
Yeah.
And I think you've probably been doing product for longer than I've been alive. So
that says a few
lots
things.
Of experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been doing product since before we called it product. And certainly long before I knew that I wanted to get into product. I grew up with a single mom. We were born in Israel, moved to the Bay Area when I was 7. We were financially sound in Israel, and then we got here and everything went belly up financially for her. And so grew up in a very poor, like very violent neighborhood in the East Bay. And so when I was 14, I started working because that was the way out of that terrible kind of financial predicament. And when I was 19, I joined Microsoft. And just to give you a sense of it, like I hadn't graduated college yet. I had been working at a small education technology company that I had kind of sold my soul to when I was 14. It was just like anything to make some money. And it just so happened that the daughter of the woman who ran the company, who also worked there, married a guy who was at Microsoft. And it also so happened that we were doing various projects for Microsoft. One of them was building curriculum for how to use technology in the classroom. So picture this, at the time I was 16, writing curriculum for how to use technology in the classrooms that I would have been going to if I was in a better neighborhood. And we did that for a woman who was a VP at Microsoft. And so by the time I was 19, I connected the two dots. The daughter who worked there, whose husband was at Microsoft, who I had gotten to know, plus Sue, who was our VP working at Microsoft on this project. And I figured between the two of them, maybe I could get a job at Microsoft. And so I asked them if they had a job for me. And somehow I got connected up to an open role here at the Silicon Valley campus for Microsoft. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know that it was called product. In fact, at the time they called it program management. They didn't even use the word product at Microsoft. And I didn't really think deliberately about what I was going. So you guys all sitting here thinking I might want to be in product is already 10 steps ahead of where I was in terms of what this thing was going to be. But I knew that I wanted to, 1, get out of the hood, 2, work for Bill Gates. That was essentially the calculus on it. And I stumbled into a project that eventually kind of it was kind of a 0-to-1 project. There's a very new, in the television space, that we were building set-top boxes and software for set-top boxes. And eventually it became a thing and it became a big product. And if any of you have heard of AT&T Uverse, which is the television product that AT&T sells still to this day, that is using the technology that we built back then. And at the time, it became a product that we sold to AT&T, to Telmex, to Deutsche Telekom, to British Telecom. All these telcos around the world were trying to build TV because they knew they were losing landlines. So this is a long way of saying I had no idea I was getting into product, but there are certain things that you do in product that I'm sure we're going to talk about that seemed intuitive to me at the time. They were exciting to me, and I spent a lot of time on them. But it wasn't until 2 companies later before I had the first job that actually was called product, even though I'd been doing product the entire time.
So interesting. So you were basically working at Microsoft when you were our age.
Yeah.
Super cool. And
I didn't go to class very much, though, so it was a trade-off, right?
All right, so takeaway is like miss class, guys, miss lecture, and then we go work at Microsoft instead.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what do you do now as a CPO? What does your day-to-day look like, and what does it actually mean to be a product manager? I think we hear the term a lot, but it's really hard for me to decipher like what that actually looks like.
Yeah. My own job, by the way, changed in the last week. You guys might have read, we did some layoffs. We also had some executive departures, and we restructured the company in the process. Up until 2 weeks ago, I ran the product team, which was all the product managers across Instacart. So about 100 people or so. As of the last couple of weeks, we decided to reorganize the company to be a divisionally organized company, meaning that we now organize across 3 things that we do. Online grocery, which is what we're all known for, in-store, which is something we're trying to grow, and then supply chain, which is once you've basically won in an area, you start going upstream. So that's the third horizon that we're going after. So I now run the entire online grocery division. I still have a title of CPO, but I now run product, eng, design, data science, everything related to that, to online grocery. So in a sense, it's gone from a team of about 100 people to a team of about 800 people. The job looks different on paper, but is actually the same job the entire time. And I'm going to convince you of that by the end of this conversation, because you guys are all like, fuck, he runs a big team now, right? Like, sounds like he must make more money and have a bigger job, like more responsibility, more people listen to him now. No, it's the same job as before. It's just a different org structure. And the reason is that in product, what you're actually doing is owning the outcome, is taking a sense of accountability for what we should build, and then like all the poo that happens along the way between when you come up with that idea and when you actually ship it. All the stuff you didn't predict, but you had the tenacity to stick with it and work through it. And so that was essentially the job. And you might think, wouldn't everyone feel like they have that job? And what you'll learn in the world is no. That people that are good at product have a natural sense of accountability. A natural desire to figure out what to do, and then like a sense of my butt's on the line for this. And the ones that fail are the ones that get in there and the first question they ask is, what is my scope or what is my role? And the ones that succeed go in there and figure out, what is it that we are trying to accomplish? Who are we trying to accomplish it for? What's the best way to do that? And don't spend too much time worrying about what they're directly responsible for and what they're not. And so they lead through influence. And so the only thing that's changed in my life in the last 2 weeks is I went from leading with influence to leading with authority. But let me tell you, leading with authority never really works in the first place. And so we're all kind of leading with influence. And so it kind of is the same job, regardless of whether the engineers report to you or not.
Interesting. And how do you build that sort of influence and get people to actually want to listen to you, especially like when you're working with engineering design, like you're not actually in charge of them. So you have to like create that vision.
Yeah. Well, I'm extremely charismatic. No. There is a methodology to it. Then there's some soft science stuff that makes you more or less successful at it. The methodology is that there is some science to figuring out what is the right thing to build and actually deciding and leading to a decision. And when you're early in your career as a product manager, you may not be the person making the decision, but you're still going to be the person teeing up, like, this is the option space. So it all kind of starts with a basic soup to nuts thing of, who is the customer? What is the problem that that they need solved? That sounds a little negative, so sometimes we say, what's the opportunity? It's the same thing. What is it that we could bring to the table that would enable us to solve it differently, better than anyone else, which requires, by the way, kind of laying out what are the different ways to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Having some sort of a framework for which way is the best way. So you're looking at 5 or 6 different options and you're kind of mentally processing which ones are the best ones and which ones are the ones to rule out. So for example, I mean, everybody has a different framework. The simple framework is, what is the upside? What is our likelihood to actually be able to do it? How much effort is it? It's some variation of that. Then you can introduce more complicated things like, do our partners like it or not? And are we more likely to have some unfair advantage if we take it one way or another? But that's the framework. And if you follow that framework, then it is actually a craft of product management. And where you separate the good product managers from the not so good product managers in that part of it is, are they able to think really broadly, or do they lock in on a specific solution too quickly? Mm-hmm. 2, do they know how to engage others to learn? Or are they arrogant and think that they know all the answers up front? So the ones that are like asking a lot of questions, asking the customer, asking other experts, et cetera, are they open-minded at kind of looking at what the competition's already done so you're not just replicating? Those are and are they generative? Like, can they actually come up with creative ideas on their own? Because it's not just a process. There is actually like some thought that goes into it. those are the things that will set you apart as a great product manager. And if you do those things, then your team, the people you do it with, naturally feel like they're included in the process because you engage them in it. And they're excited about it because your methodology wasn't just, the outcome of it wasn't just your opinion. It was also like, there's some logical framework behind it. The soft skills that you need to attach to that are just relationship building. Like, humans are not robots. And so some people will feel very attached to their own solution and they'll want to see that reflected and they might disagree. There are techniques you can use with them, like hearing them out by saying, well, if your framework's different than mine, lay out your framework. Let's rank all the options based on your framework instead of mine, and let's see what that teaches us. There's some ways to navigate those. You know, I'm from Israel. We break bread, so like you want to win someone over, you have dinner with them. Glass of wine does wonders, and you get to know each other, and now you understand that this is a human being. I have a different, we have different perspectives. You start building respect. Then you rerun the process, and all of a sudden you get a different outcome because you broke bread together. So, you get my point. Those are some of the tactics.
Interesting. I'm going to try leading with influence on my brother and see if I can manipulate him into doing what I want him to do.
Yeah. Let me know how that goes.
Probably not well. My brother does not like to listen. But I'm curious, you describe in a lot of detail like all these things that you consider when you're trying to actually build a product. And one of the phrases that I've been hearing a lot these days is like product market fit. And so I'm curious, as you're like looking at all these ideas you come up with, what your competitors are doing, how do you actually think through what your user wants and what would actually fit well with the market? Yeah,
it's a good question. We talk to customers a lot, but that's easy because we have a lot of customers. If you were in a startup, you might not have so many customers. You might not be able to talk to them. My wife is a CPO at a women's fertility startup. When she wants to talk to her customers, like, they may not be excited to share some of the information around a very private matter there. So it's like, you get different, that'll only take you so far. You have to bring a little bit of your own intuition to the table. You have to bring a little bit of your own conviction. And so I think of it less as, how do I know I have product market fit, and more around, how do I reduce the risk that I won't have product market fit along the way? So are there quick ways to prototype something? Are there things I can learn from other people who have built similar products and see like where those went and where those failed? Enough data points, enough signal that by combining all of that, I might get a sense of whether I'm going for something that's going to have product market fit or not. At the end of the day, you can achieve product market fit with any good idea, but you won't realize it for a while. Like, this is the pitfall, is you'll launch and you'll be like, didn't work the way I expected it to. And if you don't have conviction around it, you'll give up on it, and then you'll move to the next thing. And the next thing also will fail for the same reason. And it's not because they were bad ideas, it's just because you didn't stick with it. So I talk a lot with my team about finishing the swing. You can end up with a lot of self-fulfilling prophecies. This is the popular thing for me to have told you is prototype it. Show of hands if you thought that's what I was going to say. Build a prototype, minimum viable product, right? And minimum viable product is like the most disgusting phrase. Like, you're my customer. Hey, buddy, I got something great for you. It's the minimum I could possibly viably build for you. You want that product? I don't want that product. But what happens when people cut too many corners to create the minimum viable product is they usually don't do enough to make it clear what the thing is doing, the value prop for customers. They don't do enough to drive awareness of it, so it like gets low adoption. They leave major parts unfinished that actually when you analyze the data, you're like, is it that the product wasn't good, or is it that the idea wasn't good? I can't tell. That's like the worst case scenario. You've done a bunch of work and you learn nothing from it. So I try to like have a little conviction through it and see the thing through.
Interesting. And you mentioned that Instacart has a lot of customers. That also means you have a lot of opinions. And I was watching a couple of your interviews, and you talked a lot about like the importance of customer feedback. I'm curious, how do you like solicit that feedback? And especially in the case of like Instacart, you have to keep the like shops happy, the customer happy, and the driver happy. Like, how do you balance all of that, and how do you figure out who to actually listen to?
One of the things that I find most exciting about a product like Instacart or Uber, where I worked before, is that it's a multi-sided marketplace. It's just way more complicated. Like anything, I'll give you an example. Number one reason people churn off of Instacart or don't survive to month 3. Any guess?
They don't understand how to use it.
Poor delivery experience is number 2. Most people understand it because we're pretty good at kind of making the product usable at this point. Any guess what number 1 is? Price. Yeah, who said that? Yeah. It's too expensive. 70% of the people who churn say that it's because it's too expensive. So you go, oh my God, is Instacart fucked? Well, no, we have created a group of users that have self-selected that aren't so price sensitive, for whom convenience is more important than price. But if we want to continue to grow, we got to make the product more affordable. So we have a product that lets you search across all retailers. So you could type Windex, and it would come back to you with 20 stores near you that have Windex. What's the most obvious thing, if people care about price, to put on that screen? Cheapest one, right? What are the prices at all the stores? And I'll help you find the one that's cheapest. Great feature. Our retailers would uniformly murder us if we did that, because what they don't want is price hopping. Remember, we've convinced them to join our app so that we can put them right next to all their competitors. It's kind of wild, right? It's pretty good. We did it. But if we did it under within a certain framework, and some of that is the complexity of like, well, we had to abide by certain things that are important to them. Advertisers would have the same problem. When I talk to advertisers about affordability, they're like, I don't want customers to trade down. I don't want a Tide customer to switch to Gain. Typical conversation with Procter & Gamble. Gain is the second tier, Tide is the first. Lead with Tide. Now, I know that if I lead with Gain, conversion's higher. They know that if I lead with Tide, they make more money. Complicated, right? So you end up with a lot of these multi-dimensional problems that I think are very exciting because the answer isn't obvious. And also the answer is not immediate. So the urge is to run an experiment for a couple weeks and see what converts better. Well, what converted better on that one order may not actually result in a longer retained customer.
When you say converted, are you meaning like someone switches their purchase order?
No, sorry, I just mean they like completed the purchase.
Oh, okay.
Converted to purchase, yeah, I should have been clear. But I could have won the battle but lost the war, right? I could have sold them that one thing of laundry detergent because they were desperate and they needed something immediately, but they're not going to keep buying it because they felt like they spent more than they would normally have spent. Fail. So these are multivariant problems that I think are very exciting. So that's kind of what has tended to gravitate me toward those kinds of problems. Listening to customer feedback is not hard, you guys. You can run a survey. We have a research team. We have sales teams that are getting us information back all the time. You can look at App Store reviews. That's not the hard part. The hard part is what you do with that feedback when you have a lot of constraints. And you will always have a lot of constraints. So we're all looking for a simple decision-making framework. There isn't a simple decision-making framework. There is a kind of negotiation. I'll tell you what we're going to do with this specific search feature. And you'll appreciate why this is not easy to just write down in a framework or a rubric. We started by re-ranking the retailers to the ones that are the cheapest up top, but not showing the price. We show the items, but not the price until you tap through. So that's step 1. Step 2 is now we're going to put a banner on it that says great price, still not show the price. You can see what I'm saying? I hope none of my retailers are in the room right now. If we boil the frog, if we do it gently, slowly, over a period of time, we might get to the outcome we want. But if you were simply sitting down and like, okay, we're going to have this meeting where we're going to make the decision on cross-retailer search, it wouldn't be that simple. It's just not that simple. So you have these various tools at your disposal, and one of them is like the fullness of time. You can let things unfold more gradually. So that's what we're doing on that particular example.
Super interesting. Actually, very complex. Like, there's a lot of people to keep happy with that.
Very, yeah.
And I'm curious, like, with feedback, like, how do you realize, like, okay, yes, this is something I want to build versus, like, no, I hear you, but we're going to take it in a different direction? And how do you have that sort of conversation?
It's a great question. We don't let our customers design our roadmap. We listen to our customers. Mm-hmm. We have a point of view on where we want to go. Our point of view is that we want to make online grocery delivery accessible to everyone. And so we will implement more of the feedback around affordability than we will around whiz-bang new features that customers want that might be great features, but that don't help with that affordability piece.
What's the craziest feature idea you've heard?
Well, there's a bunch that are great ideas, but that are like a little not on the list. Like favorite shopper. Our customers want us to do a thing where you could tag your favorite shoppers, and then they would be the ones completing your order. Okay, cool feature, no question. Not gonna be something we launch heavily anytime terribly soon. It's things like that. There's a lot of stuff around recipes, although we're about to announce something there, but there's a lot of stuff about meal prep and recipes with like allergens, where if you could tell us what your allergens are and we could like create a custom storefront for you. Super cool. Not gonna hit our roadmap anytime soon. There's, oh my God, I mean, I get asked things like, the other day at our all hands meeting, someone asked if we're gonna create a VR or whatever storefront, and I was like, what, bananas like coming at you? I don't know. It was like, why is this better? But like, cool. Like, and I was like, we're not going to hit the roadmap anytime soon. So we do have an opinion that the growth and the thing that our customers need most is affordability followed by order quality, and we're going to prioritize those things above all else.
Interesting. Wow, that's crazy. Like, I guess if anyone just like desperately wants to experience a safe way, you could put that on.
Yeah. I have this like point of view, for example, that one reason that online shopping is not as good as shopping in the store for any category is that in a store, you get this panoramic view of hundreds of items all at once, and they're beautifully merchandised, so they don't all look the same. Even if you walk into a Banana Republic, some of the shirts are hanging this way, some of them are this way. That's all very intentional. You'll notice, by the way, fun tip, walk into a convenience store, look at the bags of chips. Which way are they facing? They're all angled toward the front door. They're facing you. So deliberate, right? Like, you think they're facing out. They're not facing out. They're all angled about 15 degrees toward the door. Someone who works for Frito-Lay did that. So that's what happens when you walk into the store. You go online, we re-rank shit, it's chaos, right? And you do a search for tomatoes, you're gonna get tomato sauce, tomato paste, canned tomatoes, and fresh tomatoes all jumbled up. Like, that would never happen in the store. So one of my pet feature ideas is to find a way to take the planogram that's in the store and digitize it in a way that actually looks, and maybe you swipe sideways through it and you can actually browse in a way that feels, we're not going to build it anytime soon. Why? Doesn't have any, it's a pet project of mine, but it doesn't have anything to do with affordability, doesn't have anything to do with order quality. So I have to come to terms with that, right? I want that. I have high conviction that that's going to be great. We're not going to build it anytime soon. Sorry to take you on an emotional journey there. Yeah.
You just need to lead with more influence.
Yeah, any more engineers is what I need. Yeah.
I'm curious, so you worked on a lot of different types of product between like Facebook, Shazam, Uber, Instacart. How do you think they were different? Especially I think the last couple have been much more consumer facing. So how do you think that's changed how you actually approach product?
Yeah. Every product has its complexities. At Shazam, you think, oh, how adorable. How hard could it be? It tells you what the song is, right? It's a great product. How complicated could Shazam be? We generated 9% of all the music sales in the world, and something like 60% of all of the music sales for iTunes. Figure that. It was insane. So when Apple wanted us to do something, you know what we did? We did it. We did exactly what they asked us to do, because they were our entire revenue stream. So even a product as simple as Shazam, you think, how complicated could it be? Actually, there were a lot of these outside factors that affected your decision making. Every product is complicated. At Facebook, it was privacy. Everything related to privacy made it complicated. I actually think I've changed more than anything through this time, and I would invite you guys to do the same. I used to take a job and spend a while learning and be very coy at the beginning about what the right answer was and take surefire bets. How many of you heard the thing of like, get a quick win? Get in there, get a quick win. First 90 days. So obnoxious. The reason is you're gonna do quick wins that don't matter. They're gonna be like little tiny things that don't matter. And that's what I did. I would get in there and I'd be like, ooh, I made that UI ever so slightly better. And now people click it 4% more. Who cares? And I did it even in Instacart. I made this same mistake. I got in there and I started making improvements to the journey and to the funnel. The entire time, the most important thing we needed to do at Instacart was make it cheaper And the second most important thing, you guys are going to memorize this, the second most important thing to do in Instacart was improve order quality. What I should have done was spend 95% of my time on those two things. And if I am being honest, I don't think I did. I think I spent some of my time on those two things. But so, and that's an improvement over where I might have been in previous roles. And the thing is just, it's so hard when you get into a company not to like get swallowed up by the inertia of what is happening in that company, what they happen to be talking about at that moment. What they happen to be talking about at that moment when I joined Instacart was convenience. Ordering from drugstores and 7-Eleven and those. We were nowhere on convenience. Uber was big, DoorDash was big. And you know what? I got a quick win on it. I turned it into a $2.5 billion business, and now we are the largest player in convenience. So go me.
That's a good win.
Yeah, pretty good, kind of, but we're a $40 billion business, and 70% of our new users are complaining about affordability. So if we fix that, that's probably like a $30 billion win. Mm-hmm. But I did the $2 billion. I'm not going to sneeze at $2 billion, don't get me wrong. But you get my point? Like, I did the thing that everyone was talking about at that moment, and I did it well. Great. But it's not, if you actually put the hat on of like, I own this company, I'm part of this company, then you should prioritize the thing that's going to make the biggest difference. And I think that that's a lesson that we all need to relearn over and over in life.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And as you were talking through that, I think you gave some examples of like all the different teams you work with, so like design, engineering, stuff like that. How do you like interface with all these different orgs, and how do you sort of, because you don't have like, I guess, expertise in any one of these areas. So how do you learn and just like learn how to interact with them?
You build some expertise over time, so that helps. I mean, hopefully I'm not completely clueless about those. Although I'm way more clueless about engineering than the others, and yet like of my 800-person team, like 500 of them are engineers, so the majority are engineers, and yet that's the bit I know least about. They're the most excited about this change, though. And the reason is that they feel like they're closer to the business. They didn't need another, exec to tell them how to write code. They already knew how to write code. The thing they're excited about is that they get this connection back to the strategy. And I think that's the thing to tap into. So when I talk to designers are magicians. They have this ability to help people visualize and understand with, it sounds so obvious now that I'm saying it, but like, in a way that nobody else can do. And have you all heard this cliche, we're creating something, it's internal, don't worry about it, just like, don't make the slides pretty, doesn't matter. The slides don't need to be pretty, just get the content on the slides. The slides do need to be pretty. And here's why. If you show someone something that doesn't look great, and you show someone something that does look great and is well crafted, they are predisposed to agree with the thing that looks great. It's subconscious, you can't help it. And so design has that ability. So with this reorg that we just did, one of the things that I wanted to do was give people, the whole company, this feeling of what the North Star is. Mm-hmm. And if I were to do it, there would be a bullet called affordability, there'd be a bullet called order quality. And when Tim did it, Tim's our VP of design, he ran design at Airbnb, he's like God status. When Tim did it, the engineers on the team were like, this is mouthwatering. He has an ability to put information together in that way. So when you're asking about like, how do I tap into these other disciplines, I'm tapping into their superpower. And in design's case, their superpower is to bring together information and bring it back out to people in a way that is irresistible. Mm-hmm. That's what they're great at. So if you want to get the most out of the design team, engage them in a way that maximizes that. So I think it starts a little from like, what is the superpower of this team? What is it that they're going to be able to bring?
And you actually mentioned not knowing much about engineering. I was looking at the fact that you studied communications in undergrad. And one of the questions that someone asked in our Google form was, how did you actually transition into product for technical roles without actually having a technical background? And what advice would you give for people that want to do that?
I think that product can be learned a little bit more easily than, if you want to learn software engineering, you really have to like get in and learn it. But whereas with product, you can kind of learn it by osmosis a little bit more. So my recommendation for folks that are in a company and want to switch into product is just get closer and closer and closer to the people who are doing that work. Eventually, you'll take on a project with them or something like that. If you're trying to get into product, I'm guessing you're going to ask that at some point here, like if you were to try to get into product from outside, That's more of these days it's more of an established discipline. So you actually need to have kind of a bit more of a plan of how you get into it. We have an APM program, which is one way to do it. But that's like, I think you need to be a little more deliberate at that point around how you're going to get into it. Any guesses how many applicants we got for those 6 positions? Oh, he's ambitious. We got 3,000, which I thought was a lot. 3,000 applicants for 6 roles is a lot,
That's
right?
crazy.
And it's like, you're going to be filtering out a lot of people. You really want great people, and you're filtering out a lot of great people at that point. So as a result, what happens is the people who are starting in our APM program, they're already better product managers than I was a few years into being a product manager. They're just like, they've found that they've done internships, they've done various things like that, where it's already not their first rodeo.
Yeah.
So they show up really skilled. They are already good at dealing with ambiguity, which is one of the hardest things for new product managers. They're already really good at like understanding that framework and methodology that I described to you guys around how you come up with a problem space solution, et cetera. So they're pretty skilled already by the time they show up. And I think it's due to the internships that they've done in advance.
But I think some of the core skills you're mentioning are like dealing with ambiguity, and then also just like having like a good intuition for what works, what wouldn't work.
And generally being action oriented, and generally being very generative, coming up with good ideas, not being overly wedded to your ideas, being good at communication, being good at working with across functions. Those are the kinds of things where that end up being pretty important for product folks.
Very interesting. And given all of this and like your entire, I guess, trajectory through product, is there anything that you wish you would have done differently?
Do we have any MBA students in the room? I'm so glad I didn't get, no, I'm kidding. That's the one that's nagged me all along, is should I have gotten an MBA? I've noticed that in my life, look, it's turned out okay, so it's fine. But I've noticed along the way that the folks who I'm around who have gotten MBAs have a vernacular and a way of thinking that is really effective at breaking down a problem, assessing a business, assessing its trajectory, et cetera, that I'm learning by osmosis, and it has been annoying along the way. Like, I definitely have felt at times, I have the concepts. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've been surrounded by this for now long enough that I'm okay at it. But it's almost like I have the concepts, but the words don't come out right because I didn't learn the right words for it. And every once in a while it produces some comical conversations. But that's one that has nagged at me. And for 2 reasons. But one is the skill set that you build up, and the other is the network that you build up. All these folks I work with, they're all just like, oh, this is a person I went to business school with, or this is a person. I'm like, how did you go to business school with all these people? But that's a value that I think I may have missed out on. That at the time, I mean, put yourself back to where I was. Poor. My mom was poor. There were people shooting each other outside. Like, I needed to get out. And so I was like, just make the money and get out of there. And so the idea of 2 more years seemed crazy to me. Whereas now in hindsight, it doesn't seem that crazy anymore.
You can always go back and get one.
It's
we
unlikely.
have one like right across the street.
I've gotten into winemaking recently, so I think I'm taking a different trajectory at this point. I'm tired. So yeah, no, it's not going to be an MBA at this point. But that was the one that got away.
Absolutely. Amazing. I saw a bunch of great questions in the Google Forms, so I wanted to open it up for you guys to ask as well. Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned like all your experiences up until now, and like for us in school, we have our teachers and like people guiding us. But like for you in your position, like what is mentoring or like guiding you as you like move forward in life?
Yeah. Great question. I have a coach, also known as a work therapist, who is very good. She can see right through me. So we meet every couple weeks. What I've noticed is I engage her for things that involve like major change, like we just did a layoff and we're changing structure. What's the best way to go about that will bring people along on the journey? She's great at giving me feedback like that. You get a lot of feedback at my level. You get feedback from your teams who are not shy to tell you what's going on. You get feedback from your customers. You get feedback from your bosses, your peers. So there's no lack of people giving me feedback. But the key is the difference between feedback and mentoring. And I think mentoring is really about like, it's more aspirational. And I think it starts from a question of what do you want to be when you grow up? And I ask that question as much as you guys do. And you try to find the people who are at the place where you'd really want to be at that point. So I'll give you an example. I did major in communications. I thought briefly that I would get into journalism. And I've always had this little hankering for it. And there's a woman on our board, Meredith, who's the CEO of the New York Times. Manuel, who you guys are going to see soon, is on the board of the New York Times as well. So a lot of connections there. She's a good example of someone who I've proactively spent time with from a mentoring perspective, not just from a feedback perspective. But when she and I talk, it's tempting to talk about Instacart, right? Because she's on our board and I am part of the exec team. But it's more useful to talk about things that have nothing to do with Instacart, which is where I tend to take the direction, the company, or the conversation. So you find your mentors. But it actually has to start with like, what is it that you're trying to accomplish next? So you pick the right ones. Yeah.
Great question. Yeah.
You touched a bit about, you said that you like for product managers to follow an idea or a product decision through,
Yeah.
just to accurately measure the effectiveness of it. But how, can you talk a little bit more about that and your view on experimentation and how you view, there is always like move fast, break things,
Yeah.
fail fast.
I've been on a rampage lately on experimentation. And I think it's because it can be paralyzing. So look, it's wonderful. I mean, when I started my career, we didn't do experiments. We didn't, the things were not that connected. You couldn't get data. I mean, it was crazy. So we didn't use data in the same way. We would do usability testing or things like that, but we couldn't experiment. Like if I put this here instead of here, how will it perform? And we definitely make better products now thanks to experimentation because we're able to try different things. And often you just don't know which one's going to work better. And we also build more intuition by reading the outcomes of a bunch of experiments because you start getting pattern recognition around what works and what doesn't. So this is not meant to poo-poo experimentation. That said, let me poo-poo experimentation for just a quick moment. The problem is your urge is going to be to get data quickly so you can decide whether to launch or not, or how to iterate, which means you're going to inadvertently be optimizing for short-term results. So I'll give you the classic example. You run an experiment in your onboarding funnel, first user experience, and more people convert to their first order. And you're like, yes, it worked. But if you want to know whether those customers are going to retain 9 months later, 6 months later, 3 months later, you're going to need to run that experiment for longer. And it's entirely possible that the decision you made up front there is actually worse for retention, but better for landing the first order. The classic example for us on this is that early in life cycle, if I can get you to sign up to Instacart Plus as a membership, happy days, because you retain better. The problem is that you won't have signed up for the loyalty program for that retailer, which gives you a bunch of savings. So what we've recently learned is it's better on the first order to get someone into their loyalty program so they're spending less on their first order so they get more affordable experience. And then by the second or third order, try to get them to sign up to the membership. Those things required a longitudinal view of what was happening, and experimentation it's not experimentation that's the problem. It's our urge to use experiment data quickly, to make decisions quickly, that is the problem. And that's an irresistible urge. And so that's why I've told the team more and more to have a little bit more conviction around what it is they're trying to build. One of the ways that I fight this is when we decide to do a feature, I now ask the team, what does success look like in terms of what percentage of customers are adopting it? Because there's an urge to kill it too quickly after you launched before it ever reached that level of adoption. And yet your business case for doing it in the first place was assuming that a certain number of people would use it. So now we finish the swing, which means we actually stick with it until it gets to that level of adoption, or until we think it just can't because we were wrong. And there are some beautiful features that are coming out as a result of that take longer, but it's worth it.
Very cool.
justify the potential losses in running like failed experiments, but you realize that very late?
When you start doing experimentation, you need to come up with a budget of what is your slush fund for how much you can mess things up along the way. Otherwise, you will feel paralyzed at every step. I mean, I'll give you another simple example. I want to make search great, like really great. The average customer does 20 to 30 searches per Instacart order. So, I mean, it makes sense, right? You're building up your basket. And so if I can make search better for you, that's great for everyone. In the process of making search better, I might mess up our ad revenue a little bit because ad, quality, relevance, or even load might change in the process. If you're not allowed to take any steps backwards in order to step forward, then you're constantly juggling all these plates trying to spin them just so you never hurt anything and you can only ever make forward progress. That's just not realistic. I mean, if you're going to renovate your house like they're doing outside right now, you're going to take down parts of the wall before you put it back up, right? You're going to mess up. It's just not, no other part in our life do we assume will only ever make forward progress. But for some reason, most companies in tech assume that when they experiment. So the quick thing to do is it's a budget. Give me a budget. How much can I mess up a metric or whatnot while I'm playing around before you're going to expect forward progress?
Amazing. Yeah, I do not know who is jackhammering at 6:50 p.m., but very interesting. Any other questions? I think we have time for maybe one more. Yeah, go ahead.
Just specifically on the GSP front, I feel like we heard a lot about the project management. As undergrads, we're able to take some classes in the GSP or you can petition for certain ones. Are there certain things that you've noticed that people that you work with know, or that frameworks that you've used that are really helpful that of all the GSP classes you could take, I would recommend taking one in marketing or one in sales. What would you recommend out of all the options to kind of pursue?
I'm glad you asked. It's a great question. I'm sure they're all great. I'll tell you about the thing that I have found very differentiating among people recently. And maybe it's a little bit driven by the fact that I've worked on multi-sided marketplaces. I actually think it applies beyond. I would focus on economics skills, econ. And the reason is econ forces you down the path of multi-dimensional decision making. Things are not simple. Everything you do has an unintended consequence elsewhere. And that's extremely important. Every single thing we do has this weird unintended consequence elsewhere. You might think that something that's great for the user on Instacart is a logical thing to launch, but if it's bad for shoppers, then they're going to churn off the platform, and then our ETAs will go up because we won't have as many shoppers. These things just you move this moves over here. You have to be extremely thoughtful about these things, and I think that product management is not a coordination job. It is a thinking job as well. There is an intellectual horsepower necessary for it, and that's the difference between product management and project management. And with product management, you have to be able to make economics decisions constantly. The second reason I'd say econ is because so many products, there was a time for the last 20 years, actually, it lasted a while, where if your product was growing, no one cared if it didn't make money. And that never totally sat well with a lot of people. And yet, we all remember this, right? It was a little weird. Now it's expected, back to normal times, I guess, so it's expected that your product's going to grow fast and that it's going to make money, which means you need a clear understanding of unit economics. Just basic unit economics, how much is this going to cost to serve, and what is our cost trajectory over time for each of these things, and how does that inform which customers I'm going after and which ones I'm not. Basic stuff like that. And those are concepts that people tend to pick up in econ classes. And I can clearly see the people who have never thought through that kind of thing, because they come through the door and they're just more customers is better. And it's customer that's going to be forever loss-making is not better. But a customer that's loss-making right now, doing something that you can make profitable over time might be fine. Those kinds of thought process are missing for a lot of folks.
Amazing. Well, I wanted to save some time at the end for people to maybe come up and just ask Mr. Danker some individual or more small group questions. So I will save the last 10 minutes for that. But Thank you so much for sharing about your journey. I learned so much. I think super cool to see how you just threw yourself
Pleasure.
into product and
Pleasure.
product management. So thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And yeah, we have a couple minutes left, so feel free to come up in small groups and just, if you have any questions or want to continue any part of the discussion, you're welcome to.